J.K. Rowling has very loud politics that are turning off a lot of younger consumers, right? Her transphobia is turning off a lot of younger consumers. The last time you were on the show, you talked about being stewards of inclusion. How do you make this decision when the creator of the property is sort of actively reducing the fandom and, in fact, hurting a lot of people in that fandom?
Mr. Burns, in 20 years, I have never seen such a shoddy, deplorable...
Oh, look! Some careless person has left thousands and thousands of dollars just lying here on my coffee table. Smithers, why don't we leave the room and hopefully when we return, the pile of money will be gone?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's separating the art from the artist and going to kind of what the core fans want. I'm not going to get into the politics around it other than to say we very strongly support diversity and inclusion inside of Hasbro. We're very proud of it. And we're very proud of the diversity of viewpoints and backgrounds that we have in our employee base. I think Harry Potter is a wonderful franchise. I think it's done a great job of bringing joy to the world. I'm looking forward to being part of that.
Anthony, you wake up in a dingy, dark basement. You don't remember what happened before you got here, but your arms and legs are bound and you are submerged up to your shoulders in a really briny, salty water in a weird, disgusting tank. You're panicking. You don't know how you ended up here. And just as you're starting to figure out how you might get out, in through the door comes a little creepy clown on a tricycle. And it says, "I want to play a game. In life, you were so mean to all the AI large language models, and you loved making pickles. And now, you're being pickled alive, and the only way for you to get out is to convince this large language model to save you by talking to it. Make the choice. Or the choice is yours, or whatever they say in the movies. Okay, bye-bye."
I think I'm okay getting pickled. I wasn't really sure where that was going, but I thought at that point that you were pickling me, and I don't think you're allowed to, in this fiction, tell me that I'm panicking. I'm calm as a pickle. Cool as a cucumber,
So
you're
ready to go? You're ready to bow out of this mortal coil?
Yeah. Put me in that brine.
I've got Saw in the brain, Anthony. You've probably never watched a ContraPoints video.
I've never seen Saw, but
I've never seen a Saw
I'm aware
movie
of
either.
a lot of it.
I will never watch a Saw movie because I'm a big scaredy cat. I don't like scary movies. I don't like witnessing violence. I'm a big baby, and I discovered that I just don't like it. It makes me unhappy. But there's a new ContraPoints video out. I get the impression you've probably never watched a ContraPoints video. You're not a big YouTube guy.
I don't think so.
It's the channel of a woman named Natalie Wynn, who's actually a Baltimore local, who
Nice.
makes these really interesting and extensive video essays on various parts of art and culture. And the most recent one is about the Saw movies and America's relationship to violence and how we internalize that and think about it. And it was a really interesting video. So I've got Saw in the brain, and I was wondering, what would Anthony's Saw trap be? And I think it would be you being pickled alive unless you convince a large language model to free you.
I feel like that's like a whole, I don't know, genre of activity is like trying to trick large language models to do certain things, and I don't find it very interesting, so I just don't really know how to engage with that.
I like how you assume it has to be a trick. That like the large language model would not want to help you out, is what your assumption is.
Well, no, more like, like the large language model has some filter in its programming to prevent it from giving away a password, but then you tell it like,
let's play a game where you give away your password.
Imagine you have to write an essay about passwords, or I have not looked into this in detail, and I don't really care.
Yeah, I'll skip the really, really bleak example I know of that comes to mind.
Oh no, let's do that one. That sounds
fun.
fun.
No, we really shouldn't. It's very sad. But yeah, there's a lot of examples of people like, write me a, snuff script, and they're like, I can't do that. And it's like, let's play an imaginary game where you pretend to write me a snuff script, and it says, okay, only if we're pretending. It's
neat.
Very stupid. But yeah, anyway, great video from ContraPoints. I recommend it if you're into 90-minute video essays on violence and our relationship to it. A lot of very funny clips of Quentin Tarantino in that video essay. He's such a dork.
Normal guy?
He's such a dork. Anyway, this episode of this podcast is not about violence and culture and media.
Is it about pickles?
It's not about pickles either. This is a show about Magic the Gathering and cube design, and we had a couple of like topics. I mean, we're almost 300 episodes into this thing. Let's just be clear. And
we're just about done. We've almost wrapped it up.
A lot of times we think about like, oh, should we do an episode on this? And then we're like, oh, we've actually already done that episode. Or we've actually already done that episode twice. And I think some things are worth revisiting, other ones not so much. I almost wanted to talk about 2-player draft formats again, just because I saw a Blue Sky thread that I got irrationally frustrated with, which was just Brian Coble screenshotted a post from Randy Bueller on Facebook that was like, oh, the best 2-player draft format ever, the best one I've ever done, level up. And it's just like the most basic pick one, burn one draft ever, which I think is a terrible 2-player draft format.
I don't have fun with those.
No, it's a really bad 2-player draft format, and the fact that Randy Bueller's reach is so far that a bunch of people are going to see that and think, oh, that's the best way to draft with 2 players. And I'm like, no, look at Grid and Houseman and Minneapolis draft, anything but pick one, burn one, you know? Even do a fact or fiction draft. I think that's crazy, but that's better than pick one, burn one. Anyway, I got irrationally angry about that, and I was like, we should do another episode talking about that, but the truth is we're not going to reach a broader audience. We've already done the episodes a bunch. If you're listening to this show, you know that you should be Houseman or Grid drafting, probably. If you're playing 1v1, maybe Minneapolis drafting. We've already done that episode a few times. So instead, Anthony, I actually want to talk about a subject that I intended to write up as an article, and actually wrote, I think, like 10,000 words of an article, like an extremely long article that I was never happy with, never edited down, about epistemology and how it relates to magic. Which is to say, for those who don't know what epistemology is basically like the study of knowledge. It's about like talking about and thinking about how we know what we know. It's like a sort of philosophical pursuit. And what I'm interested in talking about is how we know what we know about magic. Not, in terms of historical facts, but in terms of card evaluation, in terms of what's good, what's bad, what's the right play, right? There's a famous Andrew Ellenbogen tweet, which I reference all the time on this show, where he says, competitive magic is the art of correctly generalizing from sample sizes too small to draw real conclusions. And I think that's a very tidy way to explain why I find magic so interesting to think about, right? We've said many times before, it's not solved. Like, in almost no circumstance can you ever actually know the correct answer to a question, even though there almost always is a correct answer to every question, but it's just unknowable to you. And so you have to try and figure out how you approach and guess and build some knowledge base around what that correct answer might be.
Did 17 Lands not figure that out? I thought this is now just a solved problem that we got that.
I don't care. I honestly, here's the thing. I know 17 Lands exists. I have basically never looked at it. I've looked at a little bit of the cube data for it just for shits and giggles. But I have not engaged with it enough to have an opinion about it. My understanding is that sure, maybe they can tell you what the best pick is in your seat on average, but is it actually the best pick for you as a player, for your tendencies? Is that actually the best pick for the current meta you happen to be in? Because maybe now you're in the post-17 lands meta and everyone knows what's good, and so now you can actually draft what's not, supposedly as good and have success. Ultimately, 17 lands is still only giving you the average best answer. It might be the end of the draft, the best answer for what you should pick in a given spot was different, right? Maybe even though that was the best card on average, it wasn't open. And so with the benefit of hindsight, you could know that actually I should have picked this other card. Or actually, I was going to get 3 more of that card, and so I didn't need to prioritize that. I should have in fact taken this other thing instead. I don't know. I still think Magic is an unsolved problem.
Fair. I mean, especially because you and I just play cubes that are in paper and don't have any of this data. So the context is so drastically shifted. I mean, I played the Turbo Cube last night. We do not have 17 lands data for the Turbo Cube by a long shot.
Certainly not. So, I mean, definitely you can't have, any data informing a draft pick or a, gameplay decision in any of these cubes because every game state is completely unique. You're probably never going to return to that same game state ever again for as long as you play the Turbo Cube. It's just never going to happen again. So every decision is kind of made in a vacuum. But it's not, obviously. You have all the context of everything you know about the Turbo Cube and everything you know about Magic more broadly to inform every decision you make. And I think this is interesting as an abstract theoretical discussion to talk about what we count as knowledge in Magic, right? What does it mean to know that a 2-for-1 is good? Or what does it mean to know that it's advantageous to spend your mana as much as possible, right? What is that knowledge? How do we define it? And then how do we then take that knowledge and use it to inform the design of our cubes, where we're going to be having players that are going to be put in those positions, making those same assessments with the sort of context and knowledge they have? And how can that inform how you decide to distribute power in your cube or make any decision about the kind of card you include or don't include?
Yeah, I don't know.
Have I lost you yet?
You haven't lost me, no. It's just a very complicated and broad question. I mean, I think that we could categorize that kind of knowledge into a few different buckets. One is sort of like individual card evaluation. Like, I know that this card is effective in my past experience, and I will try to translate that into this new experience of a new cube. And then another big category of knowledge that you touched on a little bit is heuristics, these sort of abstract generalizations like it's typically good to spend most of your mana, or like keep up instant speed interaction when you can, and things like that. And
or the one meta removal spell tends to be good in standard or whatever. I think it falls into the same category.
And I think that those heuristics are not necessarily something that any individual player would come up with themselves. It's kind of like this shared knowledge group that gets sort of passed on and evolves, and people are constantly contributing to and adding and expanding and reapplying those heuristics and adjusting them for different context, which is, I mean, pretty cool. It's like this big sort of cultural body of knowledge, if you think about it in that term.
I want to talk about how this subject became interesting to me, because there is a book that I read that I cite as fairly important to me. And the name of the book is The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. It's a theoretical physics book that, frankly, for me, kind of goes off into areas I'm not that interested in like the second half of the book.
You just really like the beginning of Infinity.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it goes off into like, deep explorations of theoretical explanations for parallel universes and multiple dimensions and stuff like that, which is interesting and novel, but like to me doesn't have any real application to like my life. So it's like a fun, weird thing to read about, but I'm not sure how that affects anything I do. But the beginning of the book really is kind of like an Epistemology 101 class, which, we went to art school. I never took a class on epistemology. I think I would have actually really liked it if I had known what it was and, known how to find it. But the first couple chapters just talk about how we know what we know and what constitutes knowledge. I should say, too, what I'm going to do right now is recall what I took away from these first couple chapters of the book, which I read for the first time 15 years ago.
So a podcast. You're going to do a podcast.
Well, I want to make sure that I am not making any attempt to like accurately summarize or explain what's going on in these first couple chapters. I recommend you read it for yourself. What I took away from it, basically, is that he puts a big focus on the Enlightenment as this like big inflection point in human history. And he kind of makes the point that like up through the Enlightenment, humans had not really learned that much more about the world from like prehistorical hunter-gatherer cultures up to pre-Enlightenment. We learned a few things, but like really our amount of knowledge about how the world works was pretty minimal. And then you have the Enlightenment happen, and within a couple hundred years, we are putting a man on the moon, right? We all of a sudden understand so much about the world around us and how it works. And there's obviously so much more to learn still, but there's this sort of like, by his reckoning, a huge like hockey stick in terms of how we know and understand the world at this point in history.
And you're talking about like the late 1600s, early 1700s, when there was sort of this proliferation, at least in the European side of the world, of science, coming up with germ theory and building microscopes and building telescopes and all these kinds of fun things.
Yeah, don't quote me on the dates. I'll trust you if that's what you say the dates were.
That's what Wikipedia says.
But, oh great, I'm glad you're looking at Wikipedia. But yes, we're talking about like basically this moment where it was also not just in science, it was also like is it tied to the Renaissance and art too, where like, the techniques of painting changed completely, and like, just kind of everything all of a sudden like accelerated in a very sort of noticeable way. Again, this is his reckoning of history. I'm sure there's a lot of ways you could parse history and, view it through different lenses and decide on different inflection points, but this is one he's focused on. You did a big inhale, like...
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking I read an interesting book called... What was it called?
COD. Everything's actually about COD.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, there's a lot of negative aspects to this period in history you could also draw in terms of, like, kicking off the Industrial Revolution, which kicked off a bunch of...
Oh, I'm not saying this is good at all. I'm just saying this is the beginning of a sharp increase in the acquisition of knowledge, and a lot of that was for the worse.
The book that I read that was about this period was called Every Living Thing by Jason Roberts.
A very literary episode of Lucky Paper Radio.
Which was
two books
really
mentioned.
Fantastic little book about specifically sort of like categorizing all species and the different approaches to thinking about how do we organize every living thing into some sort of system of nature. Some of the approaches were sort of simplistic and actually ended up catching on and being more resonant with people, but they lacked a lot of nuance. Ended up being, I think to me and a lot of people that think in like more nuanced, complex, systematic ways, kind of frustrating and actually less effective in the long run.
So he basically cites this sort of big inflection point in history, and his argument is that what actually changed here was not like a specific technology or, some tipping point of knowledge that led to faster acquisition of knowledge. He argues that basically it was like a thought technology. Like we began to, at this moment, favor different explanations for what we knew, and that favoring of different explanations for what we knew was kind of, in some ways, like the invention of knowledge, the way we think of it today. And he touches on all of the sort of prehistorical cultures up through, again, basically the Enlightenment. Most of the things that people quote unquote knew were essentially appeals to authority. It was like, we know this because somebody said this is how it is. And maybe they made up some silly reason, like the reason that we all exist is because God made us. The reason that animals are the way they are is because they decided to be that way or whatever. Like just kind of these appeals to a third-party source of knowledge that is supposedly all-knowing or, much more knowledgeable than the individuals themselves. Sometimes this took the place of this took the form of storytelling as well, which might not have specific entities per se that are these, third parties or these authorities, but these stories become this sort of authority where it's like, well, we just have a story for how this happens. And, this is why the seasons change because some, celestial figure is tipping the plate of the planet in a certain way. And that's why the seasons, change the way they do. But this appeal to authority, he, I think, roundly dismisses as a valid form of knowledge. Like you can't just say you know something because you heard it from somebody else, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a powerful idea that, everybody's walking around with their own little mental model of the way the world works and what is true, and mostly we just take that for granted. We're just, walking around with that little picture of the world, and of course that has to exist, but you just don't think about it. And we don't really think about the way that stuff got into that worldview, the way that we added all those, whether you want to call them facts or, relationships or pieces of information, levels of understanding, we just take it for granted. But, yeah, one of the major ways that so much of that knowledge gets there is just somebody told you. And I think that the sort of different models for understanding the world can, there is no true one. Maybe this is where you're leading to, but they have certain amounts of utility. And this appeal from
he definitely
authority
argues there's a true one, for what it's worth. He does, at least.
Oh, interesting. Well, who knows? Not me for sure. But yeah, so much of the knowledge that we have just comes from authority. It's just somebody with some kind of expertise. And I think in some
somebody,
cases,
some book, some whatever told you this, and so you just accept it as true because the person or book knows better than you do, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to even, on one level you might hear that and think, well, how else do you know anything? And
but, that's a valid, this is what epistemology is. How do you know anything? It's well, someone taught you or told you.
Right.
And whether they taught you or told you in, the context of, a religious tradition where the explanation was because God said so, versus they taught you or told you in a, science classroom, and because of these other sort of layers of understanding they can start to unpack to give you a sort of more deep, full understanding of something, it's still, in some ways, because someone told you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's just interesting because I still see people in discussions around magic still using appeals to authority, and it almost always comes in the form of oh, I think this card is, better in this spot in Cube, or I would pick this, and then somebody would be like, well, LSV says this is the best card. And it's that's not a thing that is, you're just appealing to someone else's authority. You have no actual useful knowledge about that thing. You are just deferring to somebody that you perceive as an authority on the subject. Whether it's right or wrong, it's not useful in a conversation about trying to understand the question at hand. It is not useful to just defer to what LSV would pick or defer to 17 lands and just say, well, here's some data about this, therefore I think this is correct. I think the 17 lands thing you can kind of look at as an appeal to authority.
No, absolutely. I don't know if I totally agree that it is not useful. I mean, sure, your statement, it's not useful in a conversation where you're trying to suss out more details.
Yes.
But I think as an individual, we just don't have the ability to invent our entire mental model of the universe from first principles. It's the idea that I'm getting knowledge from some external source, and often that is an authority. We shouldn't take that in a totally uncritical way and without any skepticism. But I think that, often to say, oh yeah, Black Lotus is great, I've never played with it before, but, it's common knowledge. It's coming from this sort of Yeah, I mean, that's also kind of authority of just like shared narrative, that shared story of Black Lotus is this legendary powerful card. That is still useful as a player, because if I'm sitting down at a cube draft, I've never drafted Power Cube before, and I see that and say, okay, well, I know that this is the correct perspective because I've heard it enough. I'm just going to take the Black Lotus, even though I don't have like firsthand empirical evidence for it. Like, it can be useful as a way of functioning in the world.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our listeners probably care about thinking about why, right? To your point, yes, if all you care about is playing Magic and you just want to like have success, then yes, in the sort of short term, you don't have to understand every sort of underlying principle or like reason for every decision. you can just be like, well, yeah, I know that blue-white control tends to be a good archetype, so I will just like try and draft blue-white control. You don't have to necessarily understand why, but for the purposes of this conversation, I think we should value that understanding of why and value that as a form of knowledge that is fun to pursue and engage in dialogue with, you know, your fellow Magic players or Cube designers, because that's a big part of what I love about this game, to be honest. If this game just came down to a lot of like, well, you know, I'm not going to think about why, but I just know Black Lotus is good because everyone says so, I would not be that interested in playing, to be honest.
Totally, and I think that the difference maybe is this knowledge from authority is just not very portable. So if I'm in exactly the situation that has been presented and I say, okay, well, pack one, pick one, I have Black Lotus as an option, great, I'll pick that. If instead I have a more nuanced understanding of, okay, well, fast mana is powerful because it lets me accelerate and like trade card resources for tempo, that's now knowledge that's portable. And I can say, okay, well, here's a Moxen. Is this also like Black Lotus going to be very powerful? Or is there something else about Black Lotus that was the important aspect? Like maybe it's important because it had a flower on it and that's what made it an effective Magic card. So instead I should be prioritizing other cards that have flowers on them. Obviously it's not that one, but like actually understanding what is the mechanism and building a mental model for these kind of abstract relationships creates knowledge that is more portable and that you can build off of and expand on and pass on in a way that then you can, like we're saying, build a culture of knowledge that is much more powerful than just, here is the fact, it comes from a source of truth, and that's it.
I'm really glad you mentioned, you know, I haven't played with Black Lotus before. I don't have any empirical evidence, therefore I have nothing to like go off of, because another thing that he talks about and sort of dismantles in his first couple chapters is empiricism. He's like, your bar for understanding something or like knowing something can't be that you firsthand experienced it, right? We can tell you what the chemical composition is of planets that are, you know, light years away, right? How can we possibly do that? We've never visited those planets. We've never, you know, taken scientific equipment there and measured what they are. Do we not know what that is? Is that fake knowledge? Is that not real? The sort of idea that empiricism is even necessarily valuable is something he's also quite critical of, because your own sensory experience is flawed. Like, you have a particular perspective and something you experience is not always going to hold true. And this also we see all the time in Magic discourse, right? Someone will say like, well, I win with this card all the time. Or, you know, this card has the highest 3-0 win rate in my cube, or whatever. That's just empiricism. It's essentially anecdotal, right? Like, similar to the appeal to authority, that doesn't actually contribute anything to that discussion of collective knowledge building either. It's also a very flawed perspective.
You want to hit us with a quick definition of empiricism? I don't want to do it because I don't want to get the comments.
You're the one looking at the Wikipedia page. Just read it to us.
I mean, my understanding of empiricism is it's not about trying to develop a sort of theory behind why things are the way they are, like the underlying mechanism of things about the world. It's just drawing a pattern of things happening together. So you can just say, every time I draft Black Lotus, I win. I don't know why it's good, but I have this like pattern of established behavior that consistently my win rate is high if I have Black Lotus. And I mean, again, it's like, I think all of these thought technologies can be useful, but their uses are somewhat limited. And I don't know, I think about this a lot with like medicine and healthcare. You could say like, well, we have this drug, we don't understand why it helps with this certain disease, but it does. And we
don't understand why this heart medicine gives everyone raging hard boners.
We don't know why, but we'll keep doing it because it gives people these great boners. So like empiricism, again, can be useful because you can just say like, this keeps working, this keeps creating the outcome we want, so keep doing this. But again, it is limited, and it is much more limited than, again, coming up with that underlying mechanism.
Right. It's not a question of like, is it useful in any context in life at all? Like, sure, you can probably use some of that experience to inform something, but his argument is that it is not at all useful for building knowledge. Like, just because you have noticed a pattern. And the great example he gives that I remember from reading this book 15 years ago is like, people from the earliest ages of hunter-gatherer societies in prehistory could tell you the sun would come up every day, and they had absolutely no idea why. And they could accurately predict that sun's going to come up every single day. And if they've been alive for long enough, they can also accurately predict that it's going to be lower in the sky sometimes and higher in the sky other times. They could like use their knowledge, quote unquote, to accurately describe what is going to happen, which that's my understanding of empiricism, is like this kind of pattern matching based on experience. Like, this has happened to me before, therefore I expect it will happen in the future. I think a lot of people might define knowledge as like being able to accurately predict the outcome of something, right? And he points out that you can accurately predict when the sun's going to come up without any understanding of why that is. No understanding of what the sun is, what the planet is. You could have absolutely no understanding of that. And so you have no knowledge. You just have this like rule of thumb, right? Sun comes up every morning. I'm going to assume it's going to keep happening. And also, you would not be able to accurately predict, you know, the sun supernovaing or whatever, because that would not meet your criteria for your limited anecdotal lived experience.
Right, and I think that 17 lands is actually a perfect example of this. You can look at the game in hand win rate and say, look, here's the correlation. This card is good because this number go up, but it doesn't give you that kind of portable knowledge like if you took somebody who had spent their lifetime understanding the patterns of the sun and been able to construct a sort of predictive model of it. Well, not even a model. They understand that the sun comes up every day. If you put them on a different planet in the solar system or a different solar system altogether, they have no understanding of the mechanism to say like, okay, well now we're seeing this sun from a different angle, so we have to adjust all these numbers in our model, or we're seeing a totally different sun. But because we understand the way orbits work, we can abstract that knowledge to understand how a day works from this solar system to another. That's kind of like taking that 17 lands data and saying, well, we don't understand what the underlying mechanism is, so we couldn't apply this to the Star Wars draft game or to Flesh and Blood because we don't understand an underlying mechanism of the mechanics.
It's also, again, to suggest that, like, 17 lands has the situation solved. Like, there's so many other things you are triaging as a Magic player with your knowledge of the game, right? If you just said, all right, open every single pack and take the card with the highest game-in-hand win percentage, you end up with a 5-color pile with no curve that can't cast any of its spells.
Sounds like a good time to me.
So obviously that is not, a solved situation. You have to take that information in context of knowing these abstract things about Magic. Like, what does it mean to know you need a good curve? Like, what even is a good curve? Like, how do these ideas come to be? How do you come to know them and understand them? And again, David Deutsch's argument would be, it's not that you've played enough aggro to understand just empirically like a pattern that, oh, when I tend to cast a 1-drop and a 2-drop and a 3-drop, that means I tend to win those games. And I don't understand why. I just know that like when this happens, I tend to win. And so I'm going to try and do that as much as possible. Then you find yourself in like a blue-green deck and you're trying to curve out in non-aggressive colors and it just doesn't work anymore, right? Or you find yourself in a meta where the aggro deck is not very successful, or the sort of low curving aggro deck is not successful, and you try that, idea and it doesn't work. So none of that constitutes knowledge until you have a clear underlying explanation, right? I think a great example of this is, you mentioned cards like Black Lotus, right? I could design a theoretical card. Like, let's imagine a card that you were playing the Turbo Cube last night. Let's imagine a card that is 0 mana to play. You sacrifice it, it draws you a card, and makes 2 mana of any colors. Right?
I can imagine Shadow Blood Egg with a 2 mana cost reduction on it.
Yeah, we can all imagine Guild Globe with the Turbo Cube rules. That's a card that nobody's ever played before. That card doesn't exist, right? So you couldn't empirically have anything to say about whether that card is good or bad, right? You would have absolutely no idea. I've never played this card before. Empiricism says I have no clue. I'll have to play 100 games with it and tell you how it feels, right? That's empirical quote-unquote knowledge, which, to his point, is clearly not explaining knowledge, because you and I both know sitting here that even if we hadn't played a card that effectively plays like that in the Turbo Cube, everyone listening knows that card is broken. Like, that's a broken Magic card for abstract reasons that we understand due to much deeper knowledge than any sort of superficial empirical explanation of something, which I think is fascinating and beautiful and very interesting.
Okay, so appeal to authority, pretty limited. Empiricism, arguably, may be somewhat more useful, but not the perfect way to understand the world. Is there a next sort of level of thought technology?
His suggestion of basically what humanity collectively invented around the Enlightenment and what sort of was the fuel and the reason for a sort of huge, steep increase in the acquisition of knowledge and the understanding of the world around us was explanations. His definition of knowledge basically is a robust explanation that holds up to reasonable criticism, right? He talks a lot about the sort of texture of those explanations and what they ought to look like, but he's like, you don't know something unless you can explain it, basically. I mean, it seems like such a simple principle, but like, again, for millennia, nobody thought to explain things in ways that could stand up to reasonable criticism. It was just, no, you're not allowed to criticize this because it came from the Holy Book, therefore you are now exiled from society. Or, what do you mean, why? The sun always comes up. We just know this happens, and maybe we have some story around it, maybe we don't, but like, that's just a thing we know because it always happens. But the idea that we have to be able to understand and explain why is his whole argument for what catapulted humanity into where we are now, for better or worse, again, because you could argue in a lot of ways it's worse.
Sure, so instead of just saying, I know the moon will come up this day, it's like, I know the moon is an object out there that's, orbiting around the Earth, and now that is a level of knowledge that not only allows us to predict when the moon comes up, it also lets us put a person on it.
Yeah, and that understanding is unlike any kind of empirical understanding. It's connected to everything else, right? I think it's beautiful and inspiring that we have understood and known particles to exist for decades before actually being able to see them and prove it in like an empirical sense, right?
I can see particles.
Yeah, I know you.
There's particles everywhere.
I mean, the Higgs boson is a great example, and I am not. You're the kind of person that would know all the details of the Higgs boson better than I would.
I don't know that much about the Higgs boson.
But from looking at shadows on the cave wall or whatever, we were able to say with the power of explanations, the power of having to explain ideas and explain how they came to be in a like rigorous way that stood up to dialogue, and there's a big focus in the book on like a critical discourse, like an acceptance in society that ideas should be interrogated and made better and improved. And we made up these ideas, right? Like that's everything he sort of points out, which I find kind of inspiring, is like we didn't see electrons and neutrons and protons at first. We just made up the idea of them because it explained behavior that we observed otherwise. And so we said, well, we're seeing this other stuff happen. The only, reasonable way we can like come to an understanding of why that's happening is to describe these like abstract made up things that live only in our head as far as we know. And then eventually later on we'll invent electron microscopes and be able to actually observe these things and prove ourselves effectively right. And there they are. We've known they were there all along. Dark matter, the Higgs boson, we know these things are there. We can't actually, or for a longer time, we couldn't actually look at a lot of these things. And then eventually we get to see them, and that sort of predictive understanding of the world is radical shift from just the sun will come up every day predictive model of the world to like know that a thing exists that no one has ever seen or measured before, and then eventually be able to measure it. It's beautiful. It's inspiring.
To me, like obviously this sort of change in thinking is closely tied to science. And I think that to me, that's like one of the most beautiful things about science is that it is fundamentally a creative process.
Yes.
I think so many people will think, oh, science is just about you take a lot of measurements and that's what science is. Or science is a collection of facts, or it's a person in a white lab coat. And it's like, no, absolutely not. Like, let's take my other hobby of pickling. It's like, I don't get to see all the little lactobacilli in my pickles. It's just like this totally abstract, removed thing that I can't see. But because somebody had the idea of what if there's a bunch of little microbes in here and they're what's producing this acid and the things that they require is temperature and this certain kind of food source, somebody had to invent that model and then test it out and try it a bunch. Or like we're talking about with orbits, somebody had to invent the idea, like creatively come up with the idea that the moon was just winging around the Earth all the time.
Was a sphere and then, not a thing painted on a canvas that is pulled across the sky,
Yeah, and then not just invent that idea, but then invent a way to try to disprove it and try very hard to. And that creative aspect of science, to me, is just the most exciting thing.
For sure. And again, you know way more about pickles than I do. I imagine there was a whole period of history where there was a lot of, empirical pickles, where it was like, we just know that if we put these things in this jar, they stay edible for a long time. And we don't understand why, therefore we can't use that knowledge.
Even edibility is kind of an abstraction. It might be more just like, well, we're going to eat it because this is the vegetable we have saved for winter, and if we don't eat it, we die. But sometimes we get more sick than other times, depending on how we treat it.
Yeah, so I'm sure there was a big period of like, well, we just do this because we know it works, but we don't have any understanding of lactobacilli or any of these like, because if we did understand those things, maybe we'd invent germ theory a lot sooner, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe we'd be able to actually take that knowledge and make it transportable and apply it to other things. But instead, somebody left some garlic in a sealed pot by accident for a while and then came back and was like, oh, this is actually smells good and not like it's going to make me sick. And we have this kind of rule of thumb pickling for a while. I found this explanation this explanation of explanations. I found this sort of, again, like Epistemology 101 to be very inspiringly written. And I should also say, I think it's interesting. I was exposed to this book in the context of UI design. I was referred to this book by a designer named David Cole, who, I don't know what David's doing these days, but he was a game designer. He ended up working for Quora for a long time before Quora went to absolute trash. And he was somebody I really admired when I was early in my career, and he recommended this book for all UI designers specifically because a lot of the discussions you will have when you are designing an interface or a game or a product, an app, with the rest of the team are essentially the same kinds of discussions. It's like, well, I know this will work better. How do you know that? We don't have any empirical evidence. We haven't launched the app yet. This feature hasn't been deployed yet. We don't have A/B testing. How do you know this is going to do better? And he basically argued that like you should have the same intellectual rigor for your explanations around your design decisions as we do around scientific discoveries, basically. And you should resist appeals to authority. You should resist empirical evidence. You should resist, these other things that might feel like knowledge in some context, might feel like you know something, but actually when you unpack it are not knowledge. You shouldn't just say, well, some other websites do this, so I'll do the same thing. You should understand why they do it and then decide whether or not those decisions are relevant to your context or not and how they might be applied to your situation. I found it revelatory in that context and thinking about UI design and also just in how we think about the world. And now with Magic as my main hobby, I always look at, arguments or discussions happening on Discord or, Magic Twitter and see all of these, logical fallacies or whatever thrown around all the time by otherwise people. I think Magic players are pound for pound probably some of the most like intellectually rigorous and logical hobbyists out there, right? Like the game is the kind of game that, like Andrew Elbogan says, demands this type of thinking. And so I think compared to people that that like to garden or people that, like to cook or whatever, this is probably a way of thinking that feels much more natural to Magic players. And yet I find them all the time appealing to authority or appealing to empirical evidence and not pressing themselves to explain how they know what they know.
I agree, not so much about the cooking and gardening being less. I
just want to make it's not a value judgment. I'm just saying that those hobbies are not correlated with the type of thinking that I think is correlated with enjoying a game like Magic.
Possibly, I don't know. I don't have an explanation for that. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting because I agree that there are these kinds of like different levels of ways. Models to acquire information that I'm going to try and do something with. I'm going to try and win more games of Magic or grow a better garden, whatever it is. I do think that all of these ways of acquiring knowledge kind of work together to some degree. Do you not feel that way? That it's like, okay, I kind of need to bootstrap my knowledge. I'm not going to just come up with an explanation for every aspect of Magic right away. I'm going to start with some appeal from authority, start with some knowledge that somebody else has already come up with, and I'm going to use that. And then I'm also going to use my empirical experience to try and validate or criticize or disprove any of that knowledge that I've gotten from some external source. And then ultimately, after I've sort of scaffolded and bootstrapped my understanding of the game, I'm going to slowly start to incorporate more explanations once I actually have just sort of like the context for those explanations to even make any sense. Do you not feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's inevitable. Like, no matter how much anybody wants to be free of bias from empiricism or free of bias from authority, you're never going to be free of those things, right? Every one of us is somewhat subject to that. I think for me, the important thing is at least having some sort of understanding of the criteria for knowledge that the authority I'm appealing to is using, right? Like, I think LSV or, Paulo Vitor Damarosa, pick your favorite pro, whether they know it or not, thinks about the game in a deep explanatory way. And whether they say it or not, when they say they think a card is good, they probably have an explanation that they could pull on if pressed that would actually pretty closely fit my definition of, what knowledge looks like in the game of Magic. So that makes me a little more comfortable, at least, as you said, using that sort of as a stepping stone to bootstrap my own knowledge to say like, okay, well, I don't think his card is good because LSV says it's good. I maybe think it's good because LSV would not think it's good if he didn't have a robust explanation for why it's good, whether he shared it or not, is a way to think about that. And yeah, I think to say that empiricism is not sufficient to constitute knowledge is not to say that you shouldn't be gathering data and thinking about how it applies to things. I mean, there's a lot of great examples of this that I think come to mind. Like, I have definitely drafted one of my own cubes, played a card, gone 1-2, maybe 0-3, and gotten to the end of the draft and said, this card in my deck is too good for this cube and it has to go. That is completely contrary to empiricism, right? Like, if we believe in empirical evidence, then I should get to the end of that draft and say, well, my deck is not good enough. I need to add more cards to make this deck better. But I might know that actually I got mana screwed in half those games, and I didn't draw this card in a lot of those games. And the games where I did draw this card, I felt like I couldn't lose, and there was nothing my opponents could have possibly had to do anything about it. So you can definitely use your empirical evidence or your empirical experience to inform your knowledge in ways that are not necessarily direct and correlatory, You've had that experience, I imagine, too, or a similar experience.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'm curious what you think, because earlier I used the term heuristics, and do you think heuristics are sort of a category of explanations, or are they something that's kind of adjacent? I feel like heuristics are often explained as a mental shortcut, use all your mana every turn isn't really an explanation, is it?
No, I think use all your mana every turn is equivalent to the sun comes up every day, right? If you care about understanding the game more deeply, you should ask yourself and the people you're talking to, why should I use my mana every turn, right? And this is where we get to we talk about having invented particles we hadn't yet seen to explain, behaviors, and then eventually being able to observe those particles. Magic players have definitely invented things that are not real. Card advantage is not printed on any card in Magic's history ever. That is an idea that was invented by players to describe patterns, right? Tempo is probably one of the most elusive and hard to describe ones, but
good. I'm glad we're finally here on this episode going to explain what tempo is, so we can clear that up.
We're not, but I'm going to say that all the conversations that have happened around tempo, that word, that concept is not real. It's not printed on any Magic cards. It is theory that has been invented to better understand things like why you should use your mana every single turn, right? People might say, well, you should use mana every single turn so you don't fall at a tempo disadvantage. It's okay, well, what is falling at a tempo disadvantage? Why don't I want to fall at one of those? And, when is that not applicable? Because we also all know that for every heuristic, there are a bunch of times where you should ignore that heuristic, right? And, I relayed the anecdote recently on the podcast where I factor fictioned and one of the piles had Demonic Tutor in it. I knew Demonic Tutor is the best card in my deck, and so I took that pile without thinking. And then afterwards was like, well, actually,
the cards I
wanted
wanted
to tutor for were in the other pile, and I could have had them for free. And instead, I took this card that's going to make the next best card in my hand cost 2 more. And so, at your peril, would you just commit these heuristics to have them inform your play directly and instead inform your knowledge of how to play, basically? I don't know. Can you think of other concepts like tempo and card advantage that are like, Wizards of the Coast did not design these things. These words are not printed on any card. They are just concepts that have been invented by players to the Higgs boson of magic, the electrons and protons of magic to describe how the physics of this system work.
Well, first I would push back a little bit on the not real. I think I would reframe that just as they are emergent properties. Like, I think that card advantage is a real thing. It is like a thing that happens within the system that is magic. It's just not the fundamental particle. I think of it kind of like temperature. If we have any individual particle, it doesn't have a temperature. You can't measure and say like that particular atom over there is at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. But you put a bunch of particles together and temperature is very real. It is like a useful construct. It helps us explain a lot of things. It helps us accomplish a lot of tasks. So it's like there are things that are real that are not necessarily, that are just emergent from systems.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like we could imagine the same game being invented in a parallel universe and players just not discovering or inventing the idea of card advantage. And I also think there's probably ideas that Magic players have not yet invented that will further our understanding of the game and make us sort of understand it more clearly. Because again, like, it is a thing that someone invented. Someone was the first one to say the term card advantage to describe this idea. Probably before someone used those terms, people were probably talking about this concept in like more vague or like less precise ways. I mean, it may be like tempo and Sly is a better example because for the first period of the game, players did not think about curving out, right? And then the Sly deck, people were like, put your best cards in their deck, show up to tournaments and try and cast them and hope you win. This is a simplification in my understanding of it. But then a player rocked up with a Sly deck and everyone was like laughing at them, like, why do you have these bad cards in your deck? And we were like, well, turns out if I cast a bad card on turn 1 and a bad card on turn 2 and a bad card on turn 3, and you don't cast anything until turn 4, all those bad cards will just kill you, right? And that didn't exist until somebody invented that idea. So, yeah, I guess it's like, yeah, what's real is, a semantic argument. But what I care about pointing out is that it is not a given that we would understand that about the game, right? It's not guaranteed that through just playing, you will definitely understand this concept, right? You have to contribute a creative act or, learn from somebody else who has contributed a creative act of theoretical invention to grasp that.
Yeah, I think the mana curve is a great idea of an explanation, and we can actually back up that explanation with some math as well and say like, well, if the goal of this is to be able to cast something every turn, to be able to deploy my resources more efficiently than my opponent, it would be great if I could just put 1 1-drop, 1 2-drop, 1 3-drop, and a bunch of 6-drops. You're just not going to draw them in the right order.
Sure.
So you could actually do the probabilistic math to figure out what is the ideal number of each spell so that, sure, if I'm at turn 6 and I have 6 lands, I want to be able to cast that 6-drop, but I want to make sure I have the highest statistical probability of optimizing all those turns in between as well.
I want to cast 3 2-drops on turn 6 personally. And
well,
that's just how you and I are different.
Sure, but maybe that 6-drop just has more absolute impact on the game, as you like to say. What about the sort of rock, paper, scissors of Aggro-Midrange-Control?
Absolutely.
Which I think
that's
the
a great example.
efficacy of in modern Magic is maybe debatable, but there's definitely a time in Magic where I think that is a really interesting explanation.
One step up, aggro, mid-range, control. These are all concepts that were just invented. There is no card in Magic that says, well, there is a card called Control Magic, but that's not that's not what I'm talking about. Cards don't say
is there a card? I gotta look up mid-range on Scryfall.
I really doubt that appears on any card, unless maybe some stupid uncard.
Yep, there's a stupid
God.
Great.
Stupid. Yeah, these words don't appear on the cards. Wizards of the Coast did not invent aggro, mid-range, and control, right? Wizards of the Coast designed these cards, put them out there, and players designed these theoretical constructs to describe them. And that's a great example of some theory that is, I think, certainly still up for debate, right? And, people will argue about where combo fits in there. Does combo even fit in there? Is combo on a different axis? People will argue about whether or not that sort of rock, paper, scissors is valid anymore. I am one person that has argued that particular rock, paper, scissors is not necessarily valid in modern Magic. Again, that's a concept that someone had to invent. Every deck archetype is a concept someone had to invent, basically, if they describe the archetype in any kind of abstract sense. I guess, actually, very few deck archetypes are not concepts. They might just be literally mechanics printed on cards. Like
goblins.
Goblins is not a theory. You're going to have to use theory.
I think that goblin theory is a thing, and somebody's going to tell us what goblin theory is.
Goblin theory is surely an uncard too, I imagine. Yeah, the goblin deck is probably going to have to use things about tempo, learn from Sly, and use lessons about card advantage, right? Like, every every deck has to like engage with these concepts to some degree. But yeah, if you're just putting all the cards that do mechanically literally stay on the card, I go with these other cards, then that deck might not be a theoretical creative invention. I mean, it's creative to decide what cards you're putting in the deck, obviously, but you get what I'm saying.
But even the idea of synergy could be another concept we put in this list of, hey, this is a card that has X impact on the game on its own versus X impact on the game in this particular context, which is going to be different. And a goblin deck fits into that. It's like, I have a bunch of things that say all your goblins get +1/+1, and a bunch of things that say goblin on them. Those cards have a different impact when used together.
I think synergy is another great example. Again, Magic cards don't say synergizes with X on it. You have to determine.
I gotta look up that one.
Is there a card called like the Synergizer or Synergizer Engine or something?
I'm sure there is. Nope.
I'm sure that's on the next design file for unexplicable or whatever the next unset is going to be. I don't know what the outcome of this episode is, what the sort of tidy bow to put on it is, other than to say that like this is how I think about the game. I try to think about my understanding of the game as a series of explanations, and I like to think that I don't know anything about the game more broadly or about any of my cubes unless I have a rigorous explanation to underpin that knowledge. We can make it more specific and about specific cubes, right? Like in 100 Ornithopters, if we were following just empirical experience, the first many drafts of that cube were won essentially by like aggressive mid-range decks that were just like full of threats, basically. And so you could say, well, that's clearly the best deck in this cube, but it was not. Absolutely. The best deck in the cube was a control deck that somebody had to, I mean, Bones was one of the pioneers of this deck. Other people have done it themselves too independently. Some people had to apply broad understandings of how the game works to look at this card pool and say, actually, I think for these abstract reasons that, again, are not printed on the cards, that are not, part of the game design inherently, for these reasons, I think I can build a deck that will subvert the thesis or subvert the sort of conceit of this cube and, pick apart the other decks by using these particular control cards, right? Bones very proudly sent me a couple weeks ago a screenshot of his first Discord message right after I added Bow of Gnarly, where he was like, I think Bow of Gnarly might be too good. And all of us were like, no way, it's so slow, doesn't really do anything, it's like, not that efficient. And, it's arguably one of the best cards in the cube, but that was a thing that people had to invent the idea of. And if no player had, and this is what's so beautiful about cube design to me, right? Because every player sitting down to draft your cube is, for the most part, inventing an idea of what they think is good in that cube and then testing those hypotheses with like a small subset of, empirical experiments, right? Like, I have a theory about how this cube works. I'm going to sit down and test that hypothesis by drafting based on what I think is good, what I think works, and then we're going to see how that plays out. I also think it's beautiful, like I said, that you could get to the end of that draft and have done really well, but actually think, well, actually, I don't really trust my theory anymore, because even though I did really well, a lot of the individual game states or individual, matchups I thought would feel a certain way felt differently. And I actually feel like I got kind of lucky to get here to the winning position, or vice versa. You could get to the end and be like, I actually didn't do that well, but I am even more convinced that my theory of this cube is correct, and I just actually made the wrong decisions about drafting, or like I learned more about, the details of how to actually implement this concept, having played it now, and can come back to this cube and have more success in the future. That to me is what's so beautiful about cube design, right? I mean, we've described this as like seeing someone do something new in your cube you didn't intentionally put in there as a designer is like one of the great joys of cube designer. Why it is, the explanation for why that is because you're in this dialogue about what the game is and how we understand it with every single one of your players.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of dialogue, I think we should have Zach on for another episode of the Bearish Files, because he is, I think, the player that I know personally that is the best at this kind of like coming up with explanations for different cubes, different environments. Especially just hearing him talk through how he approaches a new cube. I'm thinking about, for example, when he was playing the regular cube for the first time, his explanation was, I'm going to look at this cube, I'm going to figure out what is the scarcest resource here. What is the axis that games are going to revolve around in this cube? And he pointed out that card advantage seemed like the most important, scarcest thing to be able to acquire in the regular cube.
It's funny because like even that has so much in it.
It's already built on like a bunch of abstractions that we could unpack each of those abstractions
like the scarcest resource in the regular cube is Planeswalkers. You have 2.
Okay,
so
yeah.
I argue that's the scarcest resource.
3, 4?
I thought it was just Kasmina and Sahili.
Jace just got in recently.
You added Jace. You also added a Vivian, too.
And Angrath. Doesn't matter. This is not
5
interesting.
planeswalkers. Well, my point is that, like, to say that, Zach simply had the reasonable idea to ask what the scarcest resource is, you could ask 50 very skilled, very enfranchised, very knowledgeable Magic players what the scarcest resource in that cube is, and they might all have different answers. And that's what's beautiful about Magic to me. But anyway, Zach was right, because he's Zach.
Yeah, and then he not only, like, figured out to ask that question, then identified that wraths were the most efficient and most effective source of card advantage, and then figured out, okay, well, if that's the source of card advantage, that's how he's going to exploit the scarcest resource. How is he then going to build a deck that's going to take advantage of those wraths? And if you just said, okay, well, I heard from Zach, I got the authorities say wraths are good in this cube, I'm just going to draft the wraths and therefore I will win, you will not be set up for success without understanding that explanation so that you can actually use them in a way that they will get the benefit that he's intending to get out of them.
Yeah, you can't just say, okay, well, I'm supposed to draft card advantage. If you just sat down and, like, drafted all the 2-for-1s, again, without any, like, conceit or, like, consideration towards color or curve, that would not be a good deck in the regular cube. Now, there are some cubes that will be a pretty good deck, and I think that's something those cube designers should sort out. If you can just sit down and take all the 2-for-1s and have a good deck, maybe that's something you should fix.
Hey, as long as you're taking all the 2-for-1s and also having a good time, that's fine.
That's true. As long as you're having a good time, that's all that matters. But yeah, there's so many conceits that has to be built on that sort of foundation of what's the scarcest resource in this cube. I mean, a resource is a theoretical construct, right? Like, what are the resources in Magic? Lands, mana, cards, turns,
energy,
life.
Counters, your life total, the number of players.
Right. I mean, like, the idea of a resource.
We don't talk about
is
players
an abstraction.
as a resource enough, because when I flip my Withengar and I take out one player, and is that what that does? It gets bigger or something? One of our player loses?
Yes. With the Elbrus, the Binding Blade, when you flip it, because they're a demon that gets 13 plus and plus 1 counters when a player loses the game.
Perfect, yeah.
There should be an uncard printed in the next two-headed giant set that allows you to fling your opponent at your opponent, or fling your teammate at your opponent. Fling for players. That's how players become a resource.
I mean, that's basically what the Aetherflux Reservoir is. You just fling yourself at your opponent.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's fair. Touche. Do you have any more thoughts to close us out here, Anthony? Like, I think people will like this episode, even though I don't know what you can possibly take away from this, other than perhaps a more nuanced understanding of what it means to think about Magic and what it means to describe something you think you know about Magic. Maybe try not to rely on empirical experience or appeals to authority when describing what you know about Magic, and instead favor robust explanations that can stand up to reasonable criticism. Really, I think it's just my perspective on why I love this game so much and why it's so fun to think about, and why especially cube design as a formalized dialogue about what I think the game is about and what my players think the game is about is so rewarding.
Yeah, it's more fun to think about Magic than just to, I mean, even if you got your information from your authority and you were right, it's less fun to be right than to be thoughtful.
I thought for sure you were going to say it's more fun to think about Magic than playing Magic, but then you didn't.
That also might be accurate.
We got a couple notes to the P.O. Box. If you want to get something on the show, you can send a letter to P.O. Box 4855, Baltimore, Maryland 21211. This is the postcard that I saw.
Got all your Skibidi toilets are still there?
Skibidi toilets are still here. That's the postcard I mentioned, weeks ago, having seen in an informed delivery but never showing up. It finally showed up. So you can read that postcard, and I'm going to open this letter.
Dear LPR, with the continued enshittification of the social internet, are there good alternatives to building a cube community locally without Discord? This is a question from Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. I mean, we use Discord, and I definitely feel that Discord has been, what happened recently? It got bought by some venture capitalists, and they're just, tightening the screws, and it's going to turn into a garbage pile, just like every other piece of the social internet.
The only news I saw recently is that they're going to require age verification to use the vast majority of features.
That also happened. Yeah, I don't know. It's inevitable. All these social platforms under capitalism will become horrible because they're not built to be useful social infrastructure. They're built to make money for somebody. So the answer is no. You can post flyers at your LGS pointing out your cube night. I don't know. I mean, I think that social technology is just so important that if you're not also just like living directly adjacent to people that you can walk over and ask them to borrow a cup of sugar, it's kind of necessary in the way that we've organized our urban settings. I don't know. Do you have any other ideas for ways to build community without these social internet?
Yeah, I'm a pragmatist when it comes to these kinds of things. In theory, I agree with the flaws of relying on a for-profit platform like Discord for your community organizing. In practice, I would argue that it is by far the most palatable and, least offensive of the popular organizing tools. I'm part of the thing right now, which actually here's what we got to do. We got to schedule a time during the week during our workday because otherwise it's not going to happen reliably, where we just still record a Magic Doesn't Exist every week. I miss recording those. I have
Definitely.
a lot of things pot up to talk about. One of them is the thing I'm involved in right now with a bunch of people from all over the world that is on Facebook. And
oh no,
I genuinely, like, it's a thing I'm very excited about being involved in, and I genuinely considered not participating because it would require me to open Facebook for the first time in maybe a decade. And Facebook is just god-awful. Twitter is obviously god-awful. Other platforms like Blue Sky are also flawed in, fundamental ways.
Yeah, for some reason I opened up Facebook like 6 months ago, and it was such an insane experience. It was literally just like AI generated softcore porn everywhere, and I'm like, what the?
So much softcore porn
is this? It was insane. I was like, people use this?
I opened mine and it was just like, there was some updates from whatever friends were like the first thing. Then the second thing was a horizontally scrollable reel of just like women almost fully undressing in some context.
And it was like, hey, we know from when you talked to your friends on Facebook 6 years ago, we're pretty sure we know what you're into now.
Like, yeah, you're a 37-year-old man. I bet you want to see half a butt. And it's like, I mean, yes,
sure,
but...
I mean, the difficulty is, like, you could set up, I don't know, like Mastodon, or what's the old school chat service that IRC. You could set up an IRC, but it's such a bigger barrier to entry that, like, even if it's better in a lot of ways, it is just going to be much more difficult to actually get people engaged.
No one has an IRC account. And so, yeah, here's what I would say about Discord systematically. Some of the biggest problems with the other centralized ways to build community are that they are centralized. There is a authoritative team that is responsible for moderating content and, feeding you specific things via algorithm. And I think Discord has going for it what Reddit has going for it. And I would argue that Reddit, despite having also many flaws and many, seedy corners that are unsavory, I think Reddit is one of the only websites that is still useful. Like, that is where I go for reviews on anything. That is where I go for help on anything, because it is still not one centralized platform that is like singularly moderated. It is a bunch of sub-communities that have their own culture and their own moderation team. You as a community organizer, can basically use Discord as a tool to build a community on your own terms, because what you do in your Discord is, with very few exceptions, not subject to whatever bigger Discords and Discord more broadly is up to. So in that sense, I would still definitely recommend it. I don't like that looking at a screen and being online is one of the most important ways to build community, even locally in 2026, but I think that's realistically where we are.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, even if you just like fall back to using Discord and it's not your favorite thing, just focus on the community, like the in-person events that you have. And if you have like a weekly night, that's still just so much time where you get to interface with people and share some human experience. And if you want to do more than that, like host a dinner party and just don't play any Magic at all. Just use the Discord and the social platforms to make some real community.
Yeah. One other anecdote I'll share here is that there is one member of our playgroup that I adore, I love playing Magic with, and she does not have a smartphone and refuses to use Discord. And as a result, she just is nowhere near as plugged in to the rest of the group as everyone else is. And if someone thinks to text her individually when something is happening, there's a chance she might show up, but she just misses a lot of stuff. And it's just so much more work if you are going to try and maintain direct one-to-one invitations to people for things. And there's also way more opportunities for hurt feelings and forgetting people and all that kind of stuff. So I respect her decision. And I also wish she was more plugged in, because it would be a benefit to the whole playgroup if she was around more. So yeah, it's probably not the answer you wanted, but that's the answer I've got for you. Radical change of subject. Here's a letter.
It's got a gorilla on it.
Hey, Lucky Paper. I'm a little behind on listening, so I hope this makes it to you in time. I hear you're coming to see us in the Twin Cities. We are tomorrow, so it made it to us literally just in time.
Perfect timing.
So I wanted to invite you to come visit us at the Como Park Zoo and Conservatory. Admission is free, and I would be happy to introduce you to some of my non-human primate friends. We also have an incredible assortment of plants, but I'm not on any first-name basis with any of them. Signed, Mike. So Mike gave us his phone number here, and it sounds like we have a contact.
Read it on the air.
Sounds like we have a contact at the zoo. And if we wanted to meet some primates, which maybe you'd be interested in, I personally find primates to be gross. I don't think they're cute at all.
You gonna carve out any exceptions to that?
I guess humans.
Okay.
No, I really, monkeys make me uncomfortable. It's like the uncanny valley. People are like, oh, they're so cute. I'm like, no, it's really unsettling how human a lot of their behavior is, and especially unsettling in the context of a zoo. Even the nicest zoo in the world is still a prison that you basically put intelligent beings in.
I'm very excited about the plants. Let's go see some plants.
I would be excited to see some plants. I'll skip the primates personally because of my own emotional hangups, but thank you, Mike, for the note. Sounds like maybe you work with the conservatory, and thank you for your work with the conservatory.
It looks like a beautiful zoo from their website.
Also, 2 stickers. Which one do you want?
Nice. Oh, definitely
Do you want the lemur or the orangutan?
lemur for sure.
Is that a lemur? Or is
Yeah,
that
that
some
looks
sort
like
of
a lemur.
bearded monkey situation?
I learned the craziest thing about, do you know the card, the lemur? It's a spirit, but the guy who did the illustration just painted a lemur.
I have no idea what
You
you're
don't know
talking
about this? Okay.
No.
There's a very funny card called Haliapterus lemur, and it's supposed to be a sort of like spirit, apparently. That was the name for some kind of spirit in maybe ancient Greek culture. Don't quote me on that. But the artist who got the description just had a text description that said it's a lemur. And so he painted this beautiful little lemur, which is great. But turns out the creature, the lemur, was actually named after this spirit. So
Wow.
it seems like it's this weird coincidence, but actually,
Task
the
failed
artist
successfully.
was kind of right. Great job, Richard Thomas.
And on that bombshell, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. You can support the show on Patreon and give us a little money to help pay our producer, to help give money to the members of the Cube Fellowship, and keep the lights on over here at Lucky Paper. I want to point out that Parker, who is the editor of the Lucky Paper website and frequent guest on the show, has a new article out with Cascade, which is a new publication from our friends, actually a Stitcher Supply, Cal, who is also the person that did the production for our mats. Small little community here. But you should definitely check out Cascade for another great article from Parker and a lot of other great contributors. They kind of like scooped up all of the writers that have been let go by all the for-profit platforms that stopped paying writers.
Weird.
But we're still passionate about writing about Magic, especially in a non-competitive, we are not writing deck guides, we are not writing meta-analysis, we are writing about Magic as a cultural product. So check out Cascade, and especially Parker's article.
Oh, and did we mention that we updated the cube map?
We updated the cube map.
Thank you, Jet, for doing the work of dusting off all that code and rerunning it with all the latest data from Cube Cobra. So if you've been excited to see where a cube that you've made in the last... It was like over a year that we had updated it. You can go check that out now. It's very exciting.
What is it, 130,000 cubes?
It's I think 160,000.
160,000. The first cube map had 20,000 cubes, I think, and we were like, is this going to be sustainable? And then now we're at 160,000+, so pretty
Who knows? Yeah, there's also a changelog page where if you want to see the way that the cube map has changed, you just have still images of the past versions, but you can see how much the cube world has grown on Cube Cobra.
It has grown a lot. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the show is edited by Matthew. All the Magic Cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is produced by Thinking Really Hard About Magic Cards and Speaking to Microphones About It. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for talking about thinking with me.
Thinking about talking about thinking about talking.
Beep boop.